The year is 1947. The air in New York City is thick with post-war ambition. But beneath the bustling streets, something ancient and malevolent stirs in the steel arteries of the subway system. For weeks, whispers have traveled like an express train. A shadow, a chill that drops the temperature 10 degrees, a flash of something spectral on the tracks near the abandoned City Hall station loop. It's not just a ghost story, it's a terror. Maintenance workers vanishing without a trace, train operators slamming on emergency brakes for a figure that wasn't there, and a low, guttural scream echoing through the tunnels, too horrific to be human. The police called it mass hysteria. The transit authority called it a security problem. But the whispers called it the Specter. And when the panic threatened to cripple the entire line, only one man dared to answer the call from the deep, dark underbelly of the city. Detective Kane Bones. The city was moving, but the dead were watching, and the subway was about to become their hunting ground. The roar of the A train was the heartbeat of 1940s New York, a relentless, vital pulse that connected millions. But by the summer of 1947, that pulse was faltering. The incidents began subtly, flickering platform lights, tools vibrating off shelves in the dead of night, unexplained cold spots that resisted the summer heat. Then the terror escalated. A young signalman, George Albright, 24, swore he saw a gaunt, shimmering figure, a thing of translucent shadow, pass through the wall of his booth, leaving behind the acrid smell of ozone and decay. George was dismissed, institutionalized, and his story became another tale whispered in the gloom. The official report from the MTA, spearheaded by the skeptical and pragmatic Commissioner Helen Thorne, 55, blamed faulty wiring and structural echoes. Yet when the third worker vanished, a veteran tracklayer named Silas Slick O'Malley, 61, whose helmet was found dented, lying on a dry track section where no train had passed, Commissioner Thorne, despite her rigid disbelief, was out of options. She knew the police were useless against this. A confidential tip led her to a discreet, unlisted office in a shadowy corner of the village. She needed a man who understood shadows, a man who spoke the language of the dead. She needed the only known paranormal detective in New York City, Detective Kane Bones. The subterranean labyrinth was now an open case, and Detective Bones was about to punch his ticket to the deepest, darkest investigation of his career. Before we descend into the chilling truth beneath the pavement, do me a favor. If the thought of a restless spirit haunting the steel tracks of old New York sends a shiver down your spine, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss a dive into the unknown. And tell me, I'm dying to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these tales of spectral suspense are traveling.
The air in the abandoned maintenance tunnel near 14th Street was not just cold, it was dead. It was a vacuum of warmth and sound, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. Detective Kane Bones, a tall figure in a well-worn trench coat and fedora, held a flickering oil lamp, its meager flame barely fighting back the oppressive gloom. He was accompanied by Vinnie Moretti, 38, a nervous, sweat-soaked transit foreman who had reluctantly agreed to be his guide. Vinnie kept glancing over his shoulder, his hands gripping a heavy wrench like a lifeline. "This ain't natural, Bones," Vinnie whispered, his voice catching the humidity of the tunnel air. "I've been down here 20 years. You hear things, rats, water, sometimes a drunk sleeping off a bender. But this is wrong." Kane Bones ran a gloved hand along a rust-pitted structural pillar. The metal was unnaturally smooth, and a faint electrical tingle passed through the leather. He carried a small brass-cased compass, not for direction, but for its unusual needle. It had been specially magnetized to detect disturbances in the Earth's subtle magnetic field, a signature of non-corporeal entities. The needle was currently spinning wildly, a dizzying blur. Their investigation began with the disappearance site of Silas O'Malley. The spot was unremarkable, a short stretch of track bed, yet Kane knelt and touched the track itself. It was freezing, far colder than the ambient temperature, even for the subterranean environment. He retrieved a small glass vial and scraped a minute amount of particulate matter from the rail's surface. "Ozone," Kane murmured, examining the dust. The same electrical discharge reported by the signalman, George Albright. "This isn't just a lingering spirit, Vinnie. This thing is actively drawing energy, manipulating the physical world." As he stood, the sound of a distant, slow clanking echoed from the north tunnel. Vinnie froze. "That's nothing," Vinnie stammered. "Just the expansion joints. A train way off." But Kane's eyes narrowed. The sound wasn't metallic expansion. It was the rhythm of a heavy step, slow, dragging, and incredibly deliberate, and it was getting closer. Kane pulled Vinnie behind a stack of abandoned track ties. The compass needle was now vibrating so violently it sounded like a trapped insect. A shimmering wave of transparent air flowed around the bend, silent and utterly cold. It wasn't a figure, not yet. It was a ripple in reality, a distortion moving towards us. As it passed, the oil lamp sputtered, and for a terrifying second they were plunged into absolute soundless darkness. Then the lamp flared back to life, and the heavy dragging footsteps faded into the distance. Vinnie was gasping, clutching his chest. What was that?" Kane carefully lowered the shaking compass. "That, Vinnie, was the Specter's passage. It was a search." He pointed his lamp down the track, illuminating a set of 3 deep, impossible scratches gouged into the solid steel rail where the ripple had passed. Whatever this thing was, it was not merely energy. It possessed a terrible, brutal physicality. They had just survived the first encounter with the underground terror.
Kane insisted on moving to the abandoned City Hall station loop, the true nexus of the legends and the oldest section of the line. Commissioner Thorne had provided a skeletal blueprint, noting that this loop had been shut down and rarely entered since 1945. The path was treacherous, choked with decades of dust, discarded materials, and the eerie quiet of a space designed for crowds, now consumed by silence. Vinnie, pale but resolved after the first scare, followed closely. "They say the station's built on a bad patch, Bones," Vinnie offered, his voice slightly steadier. "Old Revolutionary War graves, maybe? The whole place has bad juju." Kane paid attention to the architecture, noting the elegant tile work, a sharp contrast to the utilitarian structures they had left behind. The older the architecture, the thicker the layers of human history, Vinnie, and the easier it is for an echo to cling. As they reached the platform, a profound sense of melancholy washed over Kane, heavier than any spiritual cold spot. He retrieved his newest investigative tool, a crude, hand-built mechanical recorder designed to capture ambient subsonic frequencies, often the voice of the dead. He placed the device, a box fitted with a delicate mica diaphragm, on a bench where commuters once waited. Within minutes, the faint but distinct sound of sobbing began to register, too low for the human ear, but visible as tiny spikes on the recorder's smoked glass disc. This was a residual haunting, a deep emotional print, but it wasn't the Specter. The Specter was active. Suddenly, from the vaulted tiled ceiling, a shower of fine, dried mortar dusted the platform. They looked up, but there was nothing visible. Then the scraping sound returned, louder this time, originating above them in the service conduits and ventilation shafts. It sounded like something large was being dragged across concrete. Vinny's eyes were wide with terror. "It's overhead. It's tracking us." Kane quickly grabbed the recorder. "It's reacting to us, Vinny. It knows we're here, and it's asserting dominance." He studied the platform. Unlike the uniform cold of the tunnels, here there were distinct, concentrated pockets of frigid air, like portals of 0-degree temperature. Kane knelt beside one. "Look at this, Vinny. The cold is radiating outwards from within the wall." He cautiously reached out with a thin, unlit matchstick. As the match touched the cold spot, it instantly crumbled to dust, not burnt, but frozen into extreme fragility. The Specter is physically manifesting energy. It's creating a temporal anomaly where it drains all kinetic energy from matter, inducing instantaneous cryogenic collapse. It's consuming the life force of the environment, making it brittle. They were trapped inside a predator's territory. The dragging sound above ceased, replaced by a wet, sickling thump directly over their heads. They knew with a primal certainty that the Specter was now on their level, waiting to drop.
The moment of confrontation was imminent. Kane, rejecting the urge to flee, decided to use the station's history as a defense. "Vinny, find a map, any diagram you can find, quickly." While Vinny frantically searched a dusty storage box nearby, Kane positioned himself at the exact center of the platform, the point farthest from any entrance. He closed his eyes and deliberately opened his mind, not to communicate, but to listen to the residual psychic noise of the location. He let the echoes of the abandoned station wash over him, the phantom shouts of foremen, the laughter of construction workers, and then a strong, persistent thread of deep, crushing guilt and rage. This was the core emotional signature of the entity. Vinny reappeared, holding a brittle, rolled-up schematic. "Found it. It's an old blueprint from 1910. This entire section was designed by a guy named Elias Vance, 42, an architect. Look, his signature is all over it." Kane took the blueprint and instantly noted the subtle shift in the haunting. The Specter's presence, which had been a terrifying, generalized coldness, now felt focused, angry, and fixated on the paper in his hand. "Elias Vance," Kane repeated, his voice low. "The architect. This explains the intelligent malice, the focus on the structure. This is a spirit tied to its creation." He quickly scanned the marginalia and found a disturbing, handwritten note scrawled on the side of the schematic. "The foundation is compromised. They won't listen. A sacrifice will be made."
The date on the note was just 2 days before a documented tunnel collapse in 1912, which tragically claimed the lives of 17 workers and was officially ruled an unforeseen structural failure. Suddenly, a wave of profound spiritual pressure hit them, knocking the wind from their lungs. The ambient sound of the surrounding tunnels went completely silent. The specter was manifesting. Directly across the tracks, near a support column, the air began to shimmer violently, like heat rising from asphalt, but this was a cold shimmer. It congealed, slowly pulling in the sparse light, forming a towering, gaunt figure. It was dressed in the severe, dark clothing of a man of means from the early 1900s, but its features were indistinct, a swirl of gray shadow, except for its eyes, 2 pinpricks of glowing, malevolent red light. The entity did not move, but its terrible voice echoed directly in their minds, not through the air. "You see my work, my failure, my shame." The platform tiles beneath its feet instantly fractured, spider-webbing outwards. This was Elias Vance, the architect, enraged that his catastrophic failure and the subsequent cover-up, which blamed the dead workers instead of his flawed design, had been buried by the city he helped build. Kane knew the Specter wasn't hunting them randomly. It was hunting anyone who represented the city establishment, anyone who dared to fix its lines, anyone who tried to forget the truth. The missing workers, the signalman, all were victims of its blind, furious vengeance against the system. They were trespassers in its eternal subterranean prison of shame.
The specter of Elias Vance did not advance immediately. It simply stood, a monument of ethereal rage, radiating a cold so deep it cracked the surrounding tilework. Kane realized the key to survival was communication, not confrontation. "Elias Vance," Kane projected his voice, keeping his tone measured and respectful, as if addressing a colleague. "We know what happened. We know about the cover-up of the 1912 collapse." The red eyes of the specter flared. It raised a shimmering, half-formed arm, pointing towards the section of track where Silas O'Malley had vanished. The air around the spot solidified into a fleeting, translucent image, a pile of rubble, a lantern, and a worker trapped beneath a concrete slab. It was an ephemeral reenactment of the tragedy, fueled by the specter's memory. "They blamed the workers. They buried my warning," the mental voice screamed in their heads, a soundless thunder that made their teeth ache. "I will not let this structure hold. I will destroy it, piece by piece, until the truth is exposed." The specter stomped its shadowy foot, and a massive crack split the platform straight down the middle, running from the creature to where Kane and Vinny stood. Kane held up the blueprint, its brittle paper shaking in his hand. "Elias, look, this is the proof. This note, your warning, we have it. Your shame is not the flaw in the foundation. Your shame is the city's for ignoring you." This was a dangerous tactic, validating the spirit's trauma while simultaneously challenging its method. It worked. The specter hesitated, its shimmering form wavering, pulling in on itself as if fighting an internal battle. Its energy projection, however, became erratic and intensely focused. The metallic railing behind Vinny suddenly bent inward like tinfoil, crushed by an unseen force field of concentrated psychic energy. "It's getting ready to strike, Bones! It's going to crush us!" Vinny yelled, scrambling away from the buckling metal. Kane realized the architect's curse wasn't just a general haunting. It was a targeted act of sabotage and vengeance against the symbol of the subway's deceit. The disappearances were collateral damage, or perhaps sacrifices to power its rage. Kane had to give the Specter a focus for its rage that wasn't structural destruction. He quickly turned to Vinny. "The records, Vinny. The original report, the one that blamed the workers. Where is it kept?" Vinny, terrified but grasping the strategy, pointed a trembling finger towards the surface. "The old MTA archives, down in the basement of the headquarters building, way uptown." Kane's next move was critical. He tossed the blueprint towards the Specter. "Elias, your warning is safe, but the lie that dishonored you and the dead is still documented. If you want your name cleared, you must follow us. We are going to expose the truth above ground." The Specter looked down at the schematic, its form momentarily stabilizing as if contemplating the offer of justice. It was a bluff, a desperate plea, but it was enough to momentarily divert the torrent of its rage. The gaunt figure dissolved, not with a burst of energy, but with a lingering, intense cold draft that carried a single faint, whispered word that resonated in the air. Justice. The presence was gone, but the psychic pressure remained. It was following. They had a temporary reprieve, and now they had to race the Specter to the surface.
The climb out of the abandoned station was a frantic, terrifying retreat. Kane and Vinny moved as fast as the treacherous terrain allowed, the constant fear of the Specter rematerializing right behind them driving their legs. Every shadow seemed to coalesce. Every distant train rumble sounded like the ghost train of Elias Vance closing in. As they scrambled back up the service stairs, the heavy metal door at the top began to vibrate violently. A deep thrumming sound emanated from the door, and the rivets began to pop like miniature gunshots. The Specter was pressing against the physical world, trying to rip the door from its hinges to reach them. "It's not just following, Vinny, it's learning," Kane shouted, his hand on the cold, shuddering handle. "It's concentrating its power on a singular point." They burst through the door and into a brightly lit maintenance office, a jarring return to the living world of fluorescent lights and the smell of coffee. But the reprieve was fleeting. The lights in the office began to flicker wildly, the temperature plummeting instantly. On the office window, which looked out onto a busy New York street, a thick layer of frost instantly formed on the inside, obscuring the cityscape. The Specter was making its entry into the upper world, and its manifestation was becoming more powerful, more aggressive. Kane pulled out his small shortwave radio receiver, another specialty tool designed to pick up specific non-terrestrial frequencies. He tuned it rapidly until he found a spot of absolute high-pitched static. "It's here," Kane confirmed, checking his watch. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before it fully materializes and its destructive power reaches critical mass. We have to get to the MTA headquarters and find that 1912 report." They commandeered a transit authority utility truck, a rickety old Ford Model A, and sped through the neon-lit streets of 1947 New York. The journey itself became part of the confrontation. As they drove, the car's electrical system shorted out repeatedly, the engine sputtering and dying, only to inexplicably restart. Street lights they passed beneath exploded in showers of sparks. The Specter was a wave of pure localized chaos, its anger manifesting as systemic failure in the city's infrastructure. They finally skidded to a stop outside the grand, formidable MTA headquarters building, a symbol of the very establishment Vance despised. Kane rushed to a payphone and placed a frantic coded call to Commissioner Thorne. "Commissioner, it's Bones. The Specter is Elias Vance, a wronged architect, and he's heading for the 1912 records in your basement. He's not hunting people, he's hunting the lie. You must have the archives sealed off and prepare to retrieve the original tunnel collapse report immediately." Commissioner Thorne, still highly skeptical, was forced to listen to the palpable terror in Kane's voice. She began, but the line went dead. Kane looked up. A thin, shimmering shadow, like the smoke from a cold fire, was spiraling down the front of the skyscraper, moving with impossible speed towards the basement entrance. The race was now a literal descent into a bureaucratic and paranormal battleground.
The basement of the MTA headquarters was a cavernous, poorly lit space dedicated to the preservation of paper, a silent mausoleum of the city's decisions. The air was dry, dusty, and smelled of decaying cellulose. Kane and Vinny burst through the heavy steel door, finding Commissioner Thorne already there, along with a pair of startled elderly archive clerks who were shuffling files. Thorne was white-faced and trembling. She had felt the intense, chilling energy that preceded them. The lights in the massive hall were already flickering erratically. "Bones," she whispered, her usual commanding presence completely shattered. "The temperature just dropped 30 degrees in 5 seconds. What is that?" "That, Commissioner," Kane stated, pulling a ceremonial silver cross from his coat, "a simple, potent deterrent, is pure, targeted rage. Elias Vance is here. He's looking for the 1912 report that falsely blamed his workers for the tunnel collapse. We need to find the specific ledger before he does, or he will burn this entire building down with the truth inside it." Kane quickly explained his theory. The Specter's goal was not to harm them, but to incinerate the documentation that sealed his tragic fate. The archives contained thousands of fragile documents, and the Specter, fueled by years of stored psychic energy from the tunnels, could unleash a destructive force that would make the Great Fire of New York look like a match strike. They frantically began searching the 1910 to 1915 ledgers, Kane using the silver cross as a rudimentary energy shield, pushing back against the encroaching cold spots. Vinny, surprisingly, found a reserve of courage, driven by the desire to exonerate the long-dead workers. "Here, 1912, Tunnel Operations Report, Section D4, Vinny shouted, pulling a massive, leather-bound volume from a high shelf. As the book came free, a high-pitched, shattering whine echoed through the archive. The Specter had located its target. A transparent, ghostly hand, dripping with what looked like frozen water, burst through a nearby steel filing cabinet, clawing for the ledger. The manifestation was partial, but terrifyingly real. The hand was cold, dense, and had immense crushing strength. Kane immediately lunged, grabbing the ledger from Vinny, and held the silver cross aloft, thrusting it toward the spectral limb. The silver hissed violently, and the cold hand instantly retreated, leaving behind a scorch mark of extreme frost on the steel cabinet. Commissioner Thorne, witnessing the impossible physical assault, finally grasped the true extent of the supernatural menace. "My God," she breathed, "he's real." They had the book, but they were trapped. The Specter was now fully focused on the basement, and the temperature was dropping so fast that their breath was condensing into immediate ice crystals.
They retreated into a small records examination room, locking the heavy oak door. The Specter's presence outside was immense. The very foundation of the building seemed to groan under the spiritual pressure. They could hear the sound of shelves screeching and falling over, pulverized by the invisible, furious force of Elias Vance. Kane quickly flung the ledger onto the central wooden table. "Vinny, Commissioner, we don't have time for a traditional exorcism. This isn't a demon. It's a soul trapped by injustice. The only way to banish him is to complete his purpose. Justice." Kane quickly flipped through the fragile yellowed pages until he found the main 1912 report summary. It detailed the structural flaw that Vance had warned about, but attributed it to poor materials supplied by a competing favored contractor. A later suppressed addendum, a brief single sheet of paper tucked deep inside, clearly stated that Elias Vance had submitted a detailed warning 2 days prior, only to have it dismissed for budgetary reasons. The cover-up was undeniable. "Commissioner Thorne," Kane said, his voice urgent and firm, "you represent the city, the very authority that perpetuated this lie. You must read this, aloud, to him." Thorne, visibly steeling herself, took a deep, shaky breath. The door to the room began to bow inward, slowly being crushed by the Specter's power. She opened the ledger and in a clear, formal voice began to read the suppressed addendum that exonerated Elias Vance and exposed the city's corruption. As she read, the immense pressure on the door lessened. The chilling cold in the room began to abate, slowly, gradually. When she finished, the room was quiet, save for the sound of their ragged breathing. Kane knew the moment was pivotal. He stood before the bowing door and addressed the invisible presence with utmost sincerity. "Elias Vance, your name is cleared. The truth is recorded. Your suffering is over. The lie is undone. Go to your rest." A deep, resonating sigh, a sound of profound relief mixed with immense sadness, passed through the room, lifting the hair on their arms. The Specter was no longer angry. Its energy was dissipating rapidly, its purpose fulfilled. But as it left, it gave a final desperate burst of energy. A small, delicate hand mirror on the table shattered, and the reflection that briefly appeared in the falling shards was that of a weary, weeping man from the turn of the century, his eyes no longer red pinpricks, but filled with tears. He was finally free. The Specter was gone.
The sudden, complete absence of the Specter's terrifying presence was almost as shocking as its arrival. The lights in the examination room stopped flickering and glowed steadily. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by the normal dry air of the archives. Vinny sank into a chair, wiping a bead of sweat mixed with dust from his forehead.
Commissioner Thorne, holding the heavy ledger to her chest, stood by the crushed door, her face a mask of awe and shock. She had faced an entity from beyond the grave, and in doing so, had finally accepted the dark truth of her city's history. "What do we tell the police?" Thorne asked, her voice raspy, already thinking like a bureaucrat. "The crushed door? The vandalized archives?" Kane, gathering his few tools, shook his head. "The truth, Commissioner, is what we told Elias Vance. But the official report? You can chalk it up to a spectacular once-in-a-century structural failure. The city won't admit to a Specter, but they must admit to the failure of 1912. That ledger is the real evidence, the proof of corruption. It must be made public, officially, to truly rest Elias's soul." Thorne nodded, looking down at the ancient book. The 3 missing men, George Albright, Silas O'Malley, and the other maintenance worker, will they be found now that he is gone? Kane sighed, placing his compass back in his coat pocket. The needle was now steady, pointing north once again. The Specter was using them, absorbing their life force to fuel his temporal manifestation. I suspect, Commissioner, they were consumed by the intensity of his rage. Their bodies may never be found, lost to the system, or perhaps entirely dissolved into the energy Vance commanded. But their sacrifice secured the truth. They are now, perhaps, a part of the quiet peace he has finally found. Kane left the MTA headquarters an hour later, stepping back into the cacophony of 1947 New York. The city was unaware of the spectral battle fought in its basement, a victory over a terror born not of pure evil, but of profound human injustice. He knew that the subway would run smoothly again, the spectral cold banished, the tunnels now only echoing with the sound of steel wheels on the tracks. As he walked away, a newsboy shouted headlines about the city's economic boom, oblivious to the fact that the ghost of an architect had just demanded and received justice after 35 years. Detective Kane Bones knew the cycle would inevitably repeat. New York was a city built on ambition, steel, and a million buried secrets. And as long as humans covered their failures, a paranormal detective would always be needed to uncover the terrible spectral consequences. His next case was already waiting in the shadows. He tipped his fedora to the great oblivious city and disappeared into the crowd, the silence of the freed soul his only reward.